You're listening to RetRead Podcast. I'm Anna.
I'm Serge, and we're here to talk about books we've read.
Hope you enjoy.
Hey Anna.
Hey Serge, what's up?
We're finally recording another episode, and we've got so much to talk about.
Well, we did read a Fear Street super chiller.
I know, this thing was like 1.5 times longer than the regular length novels.
215 pages, I think.
It's pretty nuts. Before we get into that, I think we've read some other books in the meantime.
Yeah, have you read anything?
I've been reading that Caucasus Legends book. Other than that, no. I know you read a book that you got recently, and then it turned out that it was the 13th book, I think, in a series. It was kind of a popular fantasy series that's been around for a while.
The October Daye series by Seanan McGuire. We received The Brightest Fell, which is coming out September 5th, and the publisher let us know that maybe if we read the first book in the series, it would give us more context. The Brightest Fell is supposedly a book that you can read alone, but they also provided Rosemary and Rue, the first book in the series, just to let us get into the series.
Right, which is very kind of them. You know, in no way will influence Anna's review of the book. We're obviously completely unbiased here at the RetRead podcast.
I don't think I'm going to read a better book this year. Hands down, the best. I'm surprised she doesn't have a Pulitzer yet. I know Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I mean, I think she might be next.
Yeah, I think she was robbed.
Quite honestly, while I can see the popularity of the series, I don't think the first book really drew me in. It's an urban fantasy series, so my first experience with urban fantasy was this book that my friend forced me to read, and in return she would watch the first season of Friday Night Lights. She hated Friday Night Lights, but I hated her book. All's Fair is honestly the worst book I had ever read. I thought that all urban fantasy was like that. So I decided from that book on that I would never read an urban fantasy book ever again. When I opened Rosemary and Rue, one of the first few pages, it talks about how there's fae, the fairies, and I was like, crap, it's one of these books. This book already came in with me having a visceral reaction to it. But I was like, you know what? Let's let the book speak for itself. And let me tell you, the first chapter, brilliant. I was sucked in. I was like, this book is going to be great. I'll finally read an urban fantasy book that has the whole fairy thing that I'm not going to hate. Mm-hmm. And I was really excited. And then the second chapter came and I was like, okay, yeah, this works. And then there was a third chapter and I was like, And then the book just kept going. And I was like, ooh, it's not a bad book per se. And I'll start with that. It's an interesting story. She set up the world decently. But I feel like it's a book that's trying to do so much world building, so much setting up for a series that it's not letting this first book be the book that it could be. And I just couldn't get sucked into the story because it would just come to a grinding halt where she would give you story about these characters and her history with them, or more of their backstory, or their relationship with the fairy world or the human world. It's not really going to get me sucked in. And another thing she was doing was, it's so obvious that she's setting up a series. She introduced characters, like there's a queen. Doesn't really play a big role in the story, but she is brought up a lot, and there's obviously something going on with her. And she was obviously put in as a character to drive a storyline for another book, or some overarching story that's going to take place throughout the books. But the way that she was introduced, because it was so obvious and it had really little to do with the story at hand, it just made me think, why? If you want to draw someone into a series, the way to do it is just write good books, right? Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. The Pendergast series, The Relic, was a great book. I didn't know it was a series, but I wanted more. And then the second book came out and I read that. I was blown away. The third book came out. I just kept wanting more because the series was so good.
Right.
I think Seanan McGuire, what she did is she started with the whole mindset of, I need this book to be the foundation of my series, and everything that's going to be my series is going to be in this book, instead of thinking, I need to write a really great book that'll suck people in. So she was throwing bait all over this book, thinking, someone is going to bite onto something. Someone's going to continue reading because they want to follow one of these threads, and I'm going to reel them in with that.
Okay, well, if I can just play devil's advocate, and full disclosure, I did not read the book, but let's just say Seanan McGuire actually spent many years world building and writing different characters in this book series prior to the publication of that first book. And when she got the chance to actually get a book published that was set in this world that she had maybe spent a long time working on, I don't know, this is just speculation, right guys? What happens then is she's so much in love with all these characters she created in this giant world. She's just trying to stuff it all in there. She's like one of the characters in the book we're about to review that's trying to stuff all of his clothing into a duffel bag that's too small. And then all of a sudden it turns out there's no room for the Walkman, and it's like, oh shoot, maybe I'm overcomplicating something that should be simple.
Find me an author who hasn't spent years building up their first book. Every single author, how long did J.K. Rowling spend trying to find publishers for years? J.R.R. Tolkien, how long did he spend working on Middle-earth?
His whole life. So maybe she didn't know she was going to get the opportunity to have a whole series, and that's why she tried to cram everything in. Maybe this is one of her earlier books. We don't know how many books she published before this one, so maybe she was a little bit inexperienced. So I do want to give the author the benefit of the doubt here.
As a reader, I'm feeling cheated because the time I spent reading however many pages you spent building up the Queen or building up October's backstory of her daughter and her fiancé, which doesn't come back later, and it obviously should have. The character development for October was very sparse. She was so busy building up the world and explaining other characters, very superficially at that we never got to know the characters. We never really got to understand October. Like, yes, she is a changeling. She's half human, half fae. She is sort of sarcastic. You get her inner thoughts. It's first person. Giving a brief summary, October Daye is a PI. She gets hired to do what PIs do. And in the first chapter, she gets caught, she gets cursed, and gets turned into a fish. And that's
blub,
how.
Blub, blub.
It's not even a spoiler. It's literally the first chapter of the book. In the second chapter, it's 14 years later. The curse wore off.
Can you imagine if the curse wore off gradually and, for a while she kind of looked like a mermaid?
She doesn't want any part of her previous life. She just wants this life that she has. She's going to work at Safeway. She doesn't want to be part of the fairy world, but she's sucked in because someone has bound her to figure out why this person was murdered. The person who was murdered is the one that hires her. So she leaves a message on the answering machine that says, I bind you to find out who murdered me, and if you don't find out, then you're gonna die too. So you're on this whole mystery of who's the murderer? Why did this person murder one of the most important fairies? If you pay attention, it's pretty obvious fairly early on who it is and why. It's not really even a mystery. So obviously, because October was a fish for 14 years, she's just getting back to this life. So it makes sense that she's not really there. She's really out of it, because if a reader can figure out getting the same clues as her, right? Yeah,
right. She's kind of a fish out of water.
So what this book then depends on for me, because we had this conversation before, if you know the murderer and you figure out why they're doing it, then you need something compelling to keep you interested in the book. It was very lackluster in a way where I thought some things are explained to a very minute detail degree, but then other things aren't. And if I'm already done with the mystery aspect of the book, then I'm gonna need something more than that. And I don't think the book really had that for me. But it is kind of a fun read. October is an interesting character. She's sort of funny. I think this is one of her earlier books. It'll be interesting to see how she's progressed since 2009 as a writer. Well, we have been listening to one of her books, Every Heart a Doorway, and it seemed interesting enough.
That actually started out pretty good. It was somewhat compelling.
My rating for Rosemary and Rue, the first book in the October Daye series, it got a 2.75 out of 5, which rounds to 3.
Well, that's better than 50%.
After the intermission, we'll come back and talk about Fear Street, Super Chiller, Party Summer.
Welcome back. We're going to talk about Fear Street, Super Chiller, Party Summer! Alright, let's get into this. Prediction accuracy. Wow, my prediction accuracy really blew chunks. It was so bad. They've all been really bad. Ever since that one time I predicted Flamethrower, it's just been downhill.
And the thing is, you haven't even gone crazy with your predictions.
No.
These are legit, decent predictions, and yet...
Yeah, maybe I should have gone crazy. This was a crazy one. Anyway, I said not in the Northeast. Must be Florida vacation, maybe California. Definitely not the Northeast for sure, is what I said. And of course, guess what? It said on Cape Cod. About as Northeast vacation as you can get.
It's actually an island off of Cape Cod.
Right. Close, friends relaxing. Yeah, no shit. And then I said maybe one of the parents is rich to afford vacation for the week. Not parent, distant relation is rich. And then minimal parental supervision. Yep, I got that. But then, this is so wrong. Stalker following them from shady side to their vacation. Nope. Female murder, nope. Strangulation, nope. Alright, Anna, you go.
My prediction did not go as poorly as yours did. I thought it was they just left shady Shadyside book, and they're on a beach somewhere in the Northeast, like a coastal beach on vacation, specifically because that's where the ski vacation took place.
Yeah, that was smart thinking. This was very similar to the ski vacation book.
I said they were on vacation in maybe a family house, and that's kinda right.
Yep, the house is owned by a family member.
That someone brought some friends over, and yeah, that worked. And I said it was a male murderer with a male victim, and that's kind of true. We'll say kind of.
Okay.
And I said the weapon was a knife, which is wrong.
Yeah, I think I'll give you that you definitely did a little bit better than me. Neither of us saw this coming.
That is very true.
Yeah.
So what happened in this book?
All right, let's start with a brief synopsis, as we always do. First of all, chapter titles are back.
I hate chapter titles.
You know what? They're not as spoily as they were for Lights Out.
I thought at the end of the book, they did get pretty spoilery, though. I thought it gave stuff away where I would read the title and I went, oh, I know what's going to happen at the end of the chapter, because the title chapters always spoiled what happened at the end of the chapter.
That's true. You know what's interesting? Actually, right at the beginning, I think chapter 4 was called Fear, and ordinarily that would spoil something for you if you were just reading the book. Unfortunately, we already spoiled ourselves by reading The Knife before reading this book, and so we've already known that one of the characters is going to be named Simon, and we already read The Knife because we skipped ahead by accident, as we mentioned in a previous episode. So I already knew it was going to be Simon Fear, and this didn't really spoil anything for me, but if I was reading this book and it said Fear, I'd be like, why is it called Fear on this island? Maybe I would have been able to figure it out, and it would have been kind of a spoiler. I was wrong. You're right. There's spoilers in the chapter titles throughout the entire thing.
The book is written in third person. What's interesting is that for about 1.5 chapters, it follows one character. So it starts with a character called Jan, and she comes up one more time in the middle of the book. And then for the rest of the book, it follows her friend, Carrie.
So what happens is Jan's Aunt Rose gets her and her friends an 8-week summer job helping out at Howling Wolf Inn, which is located on Piney Island. It's a tiny island right off Cape Cod, which is a short ferry ride away from Provincetown, Massachusetts. There's nothing on this island except for the inn and a bunch of beach. And, of course, the inn is actually an understatement. This thing's a really beautiful old hotel, kind of like a mansion. It's got a swimming pool. It's just gorgeous.
Howling Wolf Inn is owned by Simon Fear III. He lives there with his servant Martin and his brother Edward.
So the weird thing is, the plan falls apart almost immediately, because on their drive up, Aunt Rose gets sick. She's driving the car, and she's actually physically unable to drive the car any longer. She's so ill. She has a really bad stomach ache. They have to pull over to the side of the road, and luckily, her friend or a close relative lives nearby, and they're
on the way to Provincetown.
Yeah, so it works out. They drop her off. She actually doesn't get better, but they're able to go and catch the ferry and just leave her behind.
Rose tells them to do that. They don't just abandon her.
I was worried for her. She looked like she was in really bad shape. So they go to the Howling Wolf Inn without Rose, and of course, the plan falls apart even further. It's closed for renovations, no guests, it's completely empty. They only see Martin and Simon there. Basically, they're told, you're gonna have to leave tomorrow because there's no summer job.
But Eric and Craig do some sweet talking and say, listen, we're handy, we can do carpentry, we can help out, we can get your inn open a lot sooner and a lot cheaper because we're already here. And Simon Fear III goes, why not?
And you have to think about it. These kids are really disappointed right now because they had this idea that this was going to be a party summer. This is their catchphrase. They keep yelling at each other and they're all really getting each other really psyched up for the summer. But they had great plans. They were going to meet a bunch of other kids at the pool. They were going to go surfing. They were going to go sunbathing. It was going to be the greatest summer of all time.
They also didn't look for any summer jobs back in Shadyside because they were counting on this to be their summer job.
So they're going to be screwed if they come back to Shadyside.
But good thing Simon Fear III is like, I like having kids around.
Yeah, lucky for them, right? The other thing that's going on is that Martin really doesn't seem to want them to be there or do this extra carpentry work or anything.
He's mildly hostile towards them.
Yeah, to say the least.
Odd things start happening. Jan says she sees a ghost. Carrie hears a thing calling her name in the dark. There's protoplasm on doorknobs.
Party summer never really materializes.
Yep, Rose seems to never make it to there. There's always a reason she's not coming. Jan disappears, and then there's a murder.
Everything gets derailed. So let's get into the characters. So Jen, the first character we're introduced to, is a dark and mysterious looking girl.
She has cascading curly black hair, sparkling olive eyes, high cheekbones, full dramatic lips, and as Carrie puts it, a womanly body. Okay. She's super into the occult. When you first meet her, she's doing things within a pentacle. I think she's trying to summon a ghost or something.
Yeah, she's in her attic and she has done the whole pentacle thing and she's trying to meditate her way into contacting the other side.
Her friends constantly give her shit about this and she takes it very personally. Like, they keep making fun of her like, oh, we didn't know you were a witch. Ghosts? Oh my god, you believe in ghosts? Ooh, there's ghosts everywhere. And she just gets really angry at them, always.
She's obviously one of those people.
I'd be a little offended if all my friends did was make fun of me.
If what you're doing is stupid.
The person in Jan's life that we should talk about is her aunt, Rose.
She's middle-aged, super tan, and has dark curly hair. I think she might be like an author, right? She says she's gonna work on her book during the summer, and she needs a nice, relaxing place out of the way to do it.
Well, it looks like she has a lot to write about now.
The weird thing about her, right, she gets sick, as we mentioned before. The 4 teenagers are like, hey, let's go take you to a hospital.
And Aunt Rose goes, I don't believe in hospitals. You don't believe... Are they ghosts? You don't believe in them? They don't exist? Like, you see it and you go, that's fake. That's an illusion. Her sister Eileen is a nurse who lives somewhere between Wellsville and Provincetown. That's about it for Aunt Rose. Let's get into the main point of view character that we get. Carrie Taylor.
Carrie is 16 years old, lives on Fear Street, actually very near the Fear Mansion. She can actually see it from her window.
She spends about 2 pages talking about how she hates how she looks. Her dad describes her as having eyes as blue as the ocean on a sunny day, hair soft and golden as the spring sunlight, and her dad continuously talks about how proud he is of how beautiful she is, which is completely normal.
Right.
I mean, she says that she's willy and beautiful as any model on the cover of Sassy magazine, and guys are just really shy around her because she's so beautiful, but she hates how she looks.
Well, if it's not ghosts in the occult, it's whatever this is. Oh, man.
But she thinks her friend Jan is just absolutely gorgeous because of her womanly curves and how she dresses so sexily.
She's got a sister
named Laura, who desperately wants to go, but wasn't invited.
I think she kind of misses her sister a little bit, but they also have like a little bit of a sibling rivalry going. That's a pretty normal kind of sibling relationship, I guess.
Her parents, who are normal protective parents, they kind of don't want her to go, but she talks them into it, and she's like, I need this job, and it's a good way to branch out and do new things, and they're just like, whatever.
Right, but by Fear Street standards, they're hugely overprotective and just like the worst.
They love fixing up old houses.
Yeah, that's a common theme amongst the residents of Fear Street. You'd think they'd all be like super fixed by now.
Well, the ghosts keep coming and fucking them up.
Right, and they keep burning down and stuff.
Carrie has never had a boyfriend because the guys are too shy, and she thinks they're jerks because they're too shy to talk to her because she's so beautiful. But she's actually having a thing with her friend Eric, who's also invited on this trip. The 2 boys that come on the trip are Jan's oldest guy friends. So we have Eric Bishop. He lives in the North Hills section of Shadyside, so you know his parents have money.
He's short and thin, and he has dark brown hair pulled into a short ponytail. And he has a diamond stud in one ear. Whoa. And he has silver wire-rimmed glasses. He really works hard at being cool. Apparently, mentioned a couple times he's trying too hard. He makes fun of Jan's obsession with the supernatural.
He makes her cry at one point. It's pretty bad. She got you this job away from Shadyside for the summer.
And he makes her cry and run away. But then, you know what, she decides... Well, we'll get into that later. The other guy's...
Craig Sethridge.
Yeah, and he is kind of casual.
He's described as more casual than cool. He's so chill that Carrie describes him as floating through everything. That nothing will bother him. That he could take a test and not get stressed out. Like, nothing really matters.
He kept his blonde brown hair short and neatly parted on the side. He always dressed nicely, actually very preppy. And he never gave much thought to what he wore. Probably because he's got a closet of very similar looking stuff, I'm assuming. This guy was, in the popular parlance of today, a nothing burger.
Yeah, he was just sort of there. He took up space.
He hardly took up any space in the book. Probably if you count all the lines he said, it wouldn't even amount to a page. Character-wise, what we just read off a page to you, the listener, is all there is to it. You don't get any other insights about him. You don't get to know more about him through his actions. I guess, did he say he went on vacations a lot in Cape Cod with his dad? I think that's the one little personal tidbit you get to know about him, is that he knows how to drive a boat. Now that we're done with the teenagers, let's get into the occupants of the Howling Wolf Inn.
So first we have the servant, Martin. He's actually worked for the Fear families for over 30 years and exclusively with Simon for 15 years.
You know, he's pretty dedicated to his job. He probably feels like he's kind of part of the family.
Well, he said that he considered Simon a brother. He's described as a pale middle-aged man with unruly tufts of black hair standing up on his head. He's short and thin with a lean face, small gray eyes set close together over a long pointed nose. His mouth is set in a straight line as if he disapproves of everything he saw.
If he was 30 years older, he'd be like Archer's manservant.
Woodhouse,
yeah. He's basically like Woodhouse, but 30 or 40 years younger.
and probably with a better relationship with the guy.
Yes.
He has a weedy and thin voice, but he's a good cook. But he's really grumpy and constantly telling the kids to get out.
I see what you did there. Next, we come to Simon Fear III. He's a tall, distinguished-looking man with wavy white hair and a full white mustache. He speaks in a deep, booming voice. He seems really friendly, charming, warm. He seems to really like hang out with younger people. I think he's just trying to feel the youth vibes coming off of him, you know what I mean? It actually doesn't come off as creepy as you might think it would come off like really creepy. He really keeps talking about how he likes hanging around young people.
He's just a genial old guy.
Yeah, it doesn't come off as creepy as it might sound the way we're retelling it.
I mean, I thought it was gonna be a little creepy, but he just seemed like a chill dude who just liked chatting with.
You can see why Martin likes him. He seems like just a pretty nice guy.
Well, you could see why Rose wanted to take her niece and a bunch of her friends to Howling Wolf Inn to help out and just be around there.
Exactly. He seems like just a well put together man. He's also described as tall, neat, and elegant. He's always wearing a white suit.
I'm kind of imagining Colonel Sanders.
Yeah, me too, yeah. The white hair and the mustache, you really kind of do imagine that. And he's got black eyes that sparkle in the light. And he always seems to be laughing.
Which contrasts with his brother, Edward Fear.
Yeah.
Who's Simon constantly tells the kids that Edward is just really depressed. Like, so depressed. Super depressed. He has Simon's white hair and mustache and ruddy complexion, but he's hunched over, unkempt. His hair is tousled, standing up in the back, and he wears a black eye patch over his right eye, and his face is frozen in a scowl. And he walks around with a rifle as a crutch.
Which is really kind of scary if you think about it.
But what's interesting about Edward, should we get into in-depth plot at this point?
Absolutely.
Is that there is no Edward.
I didn't see that coming. Did you see that coming?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
What did we not see coming, Serge?
We didn't see coming that Simon Fear has multiple personalities and basically
had a psychotic break after his wife Greta died.
In a hunting accident, so now he is 3 people trapped in the same body.
He's Simon Fear III, that everyone seems to like. He's his own brother, Edward, the depressed guy that no one likes. And he's also his dead wife, Greta.
Yeah, and he does really great impersonations because all 3 voices sound completely different. Nobody can tell that they're coming from the same person. I mean, this is like some X-Files shit. It's a very scary concept. And it must be really scary for Martin just to see somebody that you care for so much just completely fall apart. There's a lot to think about here.
The reason Rose hasn't made it to the island and Simon keeps telling them like, oh, she's at a spa, she's feeling better, oh, maybe she's coming tomorrow, maybe she's coming in a week, is because Rose came the day after the kids. Edward picked her up and then shoved her in a room, tied her up, and she's been in that room for like a week.
Yeah, so she hasn't actually seen Simon since they hung out 30 years ago or so.
She said 20 years.
So when she sees Edward, she's like, I guess he aged poorly, whatever. And he technically still looks like Simon. He's just super disheveled. And so she just didn't think anything of it until she got locked up in a dungeon. So you're thinking like, okay, why does this giant mansion of a hotel on an island have a dungeon? Well, it's got these smuggling tunnels. The kids actually do a pretty decent job with their summer work. They were originally going to help out with the hotel, so I'm assuming like making beds and doing laundry and stuff. But they ended up volunteering to help with the renovations, and they actually work really hard, I have to say. They do put in a couple of honest days of work, scraping old paint, peeling old wallpaper, and it's hot, there's no air conditioning, and they're just working their butts off. And as they're peeling the wallpaper, what they find is there's a secret door that's been wallpapered over. Basically, there's a bunch of tunnels under the hotel, some of them leading to the outside by the beach, beach, where I assume the liquor was smuggled in back in the day. And then there's others just leading to all sorts of secret rooms, which is kind of nefarious and shady, and don't really want to know what that was for, but whatever. We mentioned the tunnels. I just want to mention exactly how the kids stumbled upon them.
All the weird ghost things, like the ghost that Jan saw, the ghostly voice calling out Carrie's voice, the protoplasm that they found on doorknobs. That was all Jan trying to scare her friends because she was so tired of being the butt end of all their jokes.
And it was totally working too. She had Carrie like super freaked out. It was kind of funny.
Well, the joke's on her because she was planning something on the tunnels, and then Edward found her and was like, oh, you're joining your aunt in that dungeon.
You know what I'm thinking? Like, do you think he subconsciously kept them in the dungeon because he didn't want to kill his own family members? But he was okay killing the rando kids?
Maybe.
That's what I thought.
Rose and Jan are distant cousins of the Fears.
So maybe some part of him didn't want to really kill them.
So Jan's missing. She disappears, and all her friends are like, ooh, maybe she's sleeping in. So they do some work, and by lunch, they're like, okay, let's go look for Jan. They're walking around, Howling Wolf Inn, and they happen upon Simon's door, and they hear Simon, Edward, and this woman's voice arguing about a party. Edward wants this party, but Greta doesn't, and neither does Simon. They're trying to calm Edward down. And all the kids cannot stop listening because they've heard this woman in Simon's room before, and they're just like, who's this woman? What's she doing here? So they're really confused. They want to know what's going on. You're crazy! The woman screamed. Who are you calling crazy? Edward replied, his voice filled with menace. You're both crazy, the woman insisted. You should be locked up. I'm warning you, Edward threatened. Leave her alone, Simon cried, sounding frightened. Don't defend her. She doesn't need you to defend her, Edward snapped. You're worthless. Worthless. You're not frightening us, Edward, the woman insisted. Hey, Simon shouted suddenly. Don't do that. I won't stay for the party, the woman was shouting inside the room. You don't have a choice, Edward shouted back at her, his voice rough, his tone ugly. You'd better listen to Edward, Simon said. I've begged him and begged him, but to no avail. Edward, if you'd only listen to reason. You keep out of this, Edward bellowed at the top of his lungs. I've already warned you. Edward, please, the woman cried. No, don't. Put that down. Don't be foolish, Simon cried, sounding very alarmed. Edward, stop! The woman screamed. No, I beg of you, Simon cried, clearly frightened. I beg of you, as a brother, I beg of you, please. Edward, don't. Guys, come on, Carrie pleaded. She heard Simon scream. Then a second later, she heard the gunshot, deafening even through the heavy wooden door. Then silence.
When the door opens, out comes stumbling Edward with literally a smoking gun in his hands. He's still holding the rifle. There's like smoke coming out of it. He says, it was an accident. It was a terrible accident. Martin rushes over like, what's going on? Edward's like, oh yeah, it was an accident. There's like a tense standoff where Edward's got the gun pointed right at Martin. The kids are like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
And Martin tells them, get out again.
Yeah, he does tell them to get out. So that's basically the pivotal moment. They very quickly realize after this that they do need to get out, because what happens is Martin is able to kind of talk Edward off the ledge. Edward lowers his gun. Martin kind of ushers him out of the hallway downstairs to try to, I assume, talk some sense into him. Meanwhile, the kids have been told to go back to the rooms, but they're like,
there's a dead body.
Yeah,
maybe Simon's hurt. Maybe we can help him.
Exactly.
Maybe the woman needs some help. Let's go in there.
Yeah, this is the interesting part. Martin, in retrospect, see, I didn't figure out the multiple personality thing. So Martin's like, don't worry about the body. Right? He knows. Kids have no idea yet. So they're thinking Simon's in there, probably wounded. Like, I'm thinking too, like, yeah, what do you mean don't worry about the body? This is freaking Fear Street. Like, people get shot all the time, and it turns out they're not even injured. You gotta go in and check. So the kids do the right thing. They go in there and check. It's a suite. There's 2 bedrooms. One bedroom's completely disheveled and messy, and it's probably Edward's bedroom. The other bedroom is very neat and put together, and it's probably Simon's bedroom. And then there's a general sitting area adjoining the 2. And in none of the 3 rooms do they find any blood, any sign of a struggle, no bodies, nothing. They do, however, eventually find a secret room
behind a bookcase.
Yeah, it's behind the bookcase. It kind of rotates around. It's basically nothing nefarious there. It's just a writing desk and some papers, except there's a letter on the writing desk.
It's from Edward to Aunt Rose.
This is the part where all the kids shit their pants.
Dear Rose, the letter began, I am so sorry to tell you that I fear a terrible tragedy has occurred. Your niece Jan and her 3 friends have disappeared without a trace, without an explanation. I have been frantic, racked with sadness, with fear, with remorse. The police from Willow Island have combed every inch of the island without success, without a single clue. I've been trying to call you night and day. You didn't answer your phone, so I'm sending this letter special delivery. So sorry to send such tragic news by mail. I am saddened and mystified. I pray that the 4 young people will turn up unharmed, but the police offer little hope. I know that their parents will grieve, as I do. Rest assured that I am doing everything in my power to discover what has happened to them. I will not stop until the mystery of their disappearance is solved. I pray that they are alive, although all indications are that they tragically are not. I know that you will pray with me. Edward Fear.
As you were reading that out loud, I just realized something. This guy is completely nuts. Let's say he does everything that he plans to do, which is to kill the kids. Obviously, having heard that letter read out loud to you just now, you realize he wants to kill the fucking kids for one reason or another. We're about to find out why. Well, guess what? We just told you Aunt Rose actually came by ferry to the island. The ferryman saw her getting picked up. This guy has no plausible deniability. This letter, in a sense, could be trying to set up plausible deniability. He's going to show up at her house. It's going to sit in her mailbox, and when she's reported missing, the police will comb through all the letters and read this and go like, huh, that's interesting. But as soon as they interview the ferry guy, the guy's like, oh yeah, I dropped her off at the island. The guy picked her up.
Or they could just interview the police that he supposedly called, and they'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. It's completely nutso. There's no point to this letter whatsoever. It's gotta be just the ravings of a delusional man.
Well, part of his delusion, since his wife Greta was killed in a hunting accident, he has become obsessed with hunting humans.
Yeah, basically the kids run back to their rooms, grab their stuff, and come up with a haphazard escape plan. They need to leave the inn. They don't want to leave through the front door, obviously, because they know that Martin went downstairs with Edward, and Edward still has the gun. So they're going to go out the back way. They go through a different wing of the house. They find...
Well, it's more convoluted than that. They don't want to leave before calling the police because they're like, well, we need to tell the police what's happening, so if we don't get out, then the police will know to come here.
Right.
So they purposely go that way because they know there's a phone in the back.
They find a room with a light on at the end of the hallway, and they go in there, and it's a trophy room. It's got all kinds of hunting trophies. Simon likes to hunt, but before they leave, they notice one last thing that's very chilling.
4 trophies.
Of human heads.
And that's when they decide, it doesn't matter, they just need to get out. Who cares what way, how, who they contact, they just need to leave right then and there.
Yeah. So they run out. They do have a plan. They're gonna go back to the boathouse and grab the boat. And Craig knows how to drive a boat because he goes to Cape Cod with his dad every summer. They actually go all the way down through the woods, down to the dock, the boathouse, and it turns out the boathouse is locked. This is the part that I don't get. There's basically some kind of dock and there's probably a boat there. They can't get through the fence because it's like a spiky fence. Why not just swim around? Can they swim? The fence doesn't go all the way into the water, obviously. You might even be able to just wade like up to your neck or something and still get to that boat dock and get on the boat. It started raining at some point during this night and they were running around a lot outside. They all got soaked all the way through anyway. So it's not like, oh, we don't want to get wet. Oh, and all the things they packed, they lost all that stuff too. So it's not like, oh, we don't want to get our stuff wet. It's literally life and death. You can swim or wade and get to that boat.
Nitpicks aside, they decide that they're going to go to the canoes.
Yeah, and of course, the canoes are gone.
They didn't think of looking in the canoe house for the canoes or wherever you store canoes, but that's not the point. They decide they're trapped on the island. They don't know what to do.
So they decide, we need to get out of the rain. Let's get into the pool house and we can hide in there for a bit. They get confronted by Edward, who starts shooting at them. He invites him to join the party, but they already kind of figured out what he's on about. So they run away. They run to the woods. He shoots at them a bunch of times. They run through the woods. Then they circle back to the hotel again, this time to place a phone call from the lobby because they're convinced that Martin and Edward are still out in the woods looking for them in the rain.
The phones haven't been working their entire stay. There's switchboards, and all the phones are command central through this one switchboard.
Yeah, in the main office.
But they're not calling for the main office, so they think they're calling out.
And they've been told this already.
They've been told several times. Their entire stay. Every day they've been told because they want to go talk to Aunt Rose.
Yeah, but hey, 90s thing, they don't know what a switchboard is anymore, so they're like, whatever. You know, like, you can tell somebody switchboard a million times. If you don't know what a switchboard is, you might just ignore it and not think about it twice.
How's that a 90s thing?
Because they didn't have Google on their phone to look up switchboard. And, Eric's too busy looking cool to ask what a switchboard is, so...
Well, a place like this probably wouldn't have Wi-Fi or service, so it doesn't really matter about the smartphones and whatever. Anyways...
Oh, it would definitely have Wi-Fi.
Oh, no. I think Martin would do anything to keep Simon Fear from, finding more ways to spread his delusions or add things to his delusions.
Well, yeah, but a nice hotel like this, frequented by...
It's frequented by no one.
Right now it isn't.
That's exactly my point. I think Martin wants to keep it that way.
They place a phone call.
And it goes through, apparently. They're talking to someone with a nasally voice. Mm-hmm. And they say, listen, you gotta come here. You gotta save us. And they're like, okay.
Yeah, they get patched through to the quote-unquote police. And another voice comes on and is like, yep, next 20 minutes you should be rescued. And then Simon Fear walks out of the switchboard room.
And they're all like, you're supposed to be dead.
Yeah, no, he was operating the switchboards. And this is kind of a cool moment. Because what happens is, here's Simon Fear in the flesh. And right before his eyes, in a matter of seconds, he transfigures himself and becomes Edward Fear. And so here they are standing in the hotel lobby, just all shocked.
The three kids are asking him, you need to save us. You need to stop Edward from hunting us. And Simon's just like, what? And they're like, please, please. And he just starts grinning, really creepily grinning at them. And they're not understanding why he's not helping them. And then slowly he just starts removing clothing, messing up his hair. And then he puts on the eye patch and they're just like, please help us. And then as Edward, he screams, yes, a hunting party. There's no way I can stop a hunting party.
He finally gets a captive audience. They can't run away from him. He's got a gun on them. They're trapped in the hotel lobby. He officially begins the hunting game. He explains to them the rules.
They get an hour to run wherever they need to go because it's sporting that way.
Even though he's already been shooting at them pretty much this whole time, but whatever.
He has had a psychotic break. Things don't have to make sense.
Then he starts shooting at the wall and they all bolt out of there. They're back out in the rain again.
Well, they end up in the tunnels.
So then they ended up circling back to the hotel again, because I guess they just don't like the wet. They decide, you know what? We're not going to be found in the tunnels. First of all, they're probably out there in the woods. Secondly, even if they did go back to the house, they wouldn't search the tunnels. So let's go in the tunnels. So they go in the tunnels with no flashlights. Great plan. It's the middle of the night anyway, but it wouldn't make any difference. It's the freaking tunnels. So they're going in there blind.
Eric falls to the floor, and then they try to get Eric out. And then they hear the voices.
Eric and Craig bust the door open with their man force. Lo and behold, it's
Jan and Rose.
They're being kept prisoner in this room, all locked up. The truth comes out about how Rose got kidnapped and how Jan got dragged in there. And Jan tells them that she's been pranking him the whole time. Nobody gives a shit because they're all being hunted to death. They're about to go escape.
Well, they actually tell them, listen, we're related to the Fears. And they're like, we know already. We saw the pictures.
Yeah.
And then Jan's like, oh, that must mean I'm related to the Fears. And they're like, we know already.
Yep.
They have no patience for this. But
yeah.
This is when the stupid comes in, because Rose has been locked up for a few days.
Yeah.
So she's really hungry. She's faint. And they're like, the first thing we need to do is get some food in you. So they take her to the kitchen.
Yep.
Turn on all the lights.
Make tuna salad.
It's the dumbest thing.
So then they're having a freaking tuna salad party. And Martin comes in and what the fuck are you guys doing?
Martin is really confused. She's like, why is everyone so scared and crazy, and what is going on? So Rose basically forces Martin to explain everything, and all the kids are like, why are you going to believe anything Martin has to say? So Martin basically gives the backstory of how Simon lost his mind after Greta was killed, and how he's always wanted to have a hunting party of humans.
And so now everything clicks in place and makes sense, and then Edward busts in with his gun. He's gonna shoot everybody. He's mad at Martin. He's pissed off at Rose. Rose is yelling at him. This whole big scene, and everything comes up to a final climax.
And Carrie walks up and says, shoot me first then.
Carrie's got it all figured out, apparently. This is like that Council of Elrond scene in Fellowship of the Rings. Everybody's arguing all at the same time.
And Frodo walks up.
And he says, I'll take the ring. I will take the ring to Mordor. So this is basically Carrie. She's like, shoot me first. And everybody's confused. And Edward's like, all right, whatever. I'll point the gun at you now.
And Eric tries to get her out of there. And she pushes him away and says, no, just shoot me first. And Edward, I guess he's done being sporting. Because I don't see how this is sporting. They're literally just standing there telling you to shoot them. But whatever.
Yeah.
He shoots her twice with his rifle.
I guess she doesn't die. He was shooting blanks the whole time. She somehow figured that out.
Well, because she noticed that there were no holes or anything being broken whenever he was shooting indoors.
Sure, and all the times he shot him in the woods, every single shot missed even though he was super close range. She didn't hear any bullets whizzing by or anything. So she's like, fuck it, it must be blanks. I guess Martin just put a bunch of blanks in his rifle. They're able to just wrestle the gun away from him, tie him up, and they all sail happily over back to the mainland on the next boat.
Carrie and Eric kiss on the boat. That's their party summer.
All their worst fears are going to come true, where they have to go back to Shadyside and suffer the no job, no plans, no fun. Why don't we talk about the nitpicks? There's a lot to talk about.
Did they even get paid for the work they did?
No. And you know what? I get the suspicion that they were not really going to get paid for the work they were going to do. It had been a normal thing. But they got to eat some nice meals and stayed at a nice hotel. It was fun for 2 days. Not for Jen. I don't think it was fun for Jen because she was worried about her aunt the whole time and also busy trying to prank her friends.
Well, and also her friends were making fun of her.
Yeah, the other 3 probably had fun.
Well, I don't know about Craig because nothing actually happened with him.
Yeah.
What nitpicks did you have?
First of all, getting shot within arm's reach, basically point blank range with a rifle, even if it's a blank, that's still gonna hurt a lot. You're gonna get severely burned, and it could actually be fatal.
Yeah, actually, I read that 4 to 6 feet, you could still get pretty injured. They've actually had a few instances where on stage for plays, they would use blanks on their guns, and then they were pointed to their head and shoot because they think it's a blank, and then they die. She was arm's length away?
Yeah.
Because she could get the rifle from him. So that is pretty painful, 2 shots to the chest.
Right, so the thing about the blank is that it actually, to my understanding, still has all the same gunpowder that a normal bullet would have, and it just doesn't have the actual bullets.
So another nitpick I had was, and this is actually a text. It's in the text that there's an issue. When they're looking for Jan, it specifically says they're looking for Jan. Yeah. And they end up eavesdropping on Simon, Edward, and Greta right before the big reveal of Simon getting shot or whatever. The text says that the 4 teenagers were standing in the hallway. It's actually only 3 teenagers because one of them is missing. That's the whole point of them being there.
Yeah.
So that's actually something the editor missed. Another nitpick that I had, and I think you had as well. So after they read the letter that Edward has written to Rose, and they're like, oh shit, maybe it's time to leave. Instead of leaving right away, which is what anybody sane would do, they all split up and go pack their stuff. And then they go make a phone call. You've just read a letter saying that basically this guy is going to kill you and disappear you. Leave.
Carrie is not going to be caught dead without all her fashionable clothing in her bag. So then the other thing is that Edward fears an old man. And there are many instances where Craig or Eric were within arm's reach of this guy. Just knock him down. The dude's 60 to 70 years old. Yank his gun. Carrie did that. She knocked his gun away and basically took him down. That's one of the hallmarks of the Fear Street series so far, is the female protagonist going F you and your effing gun. I'm gonna take you down. Bam. We had a giant dump of Fear Street mythos in this book. We finally get the big reveal of what the heck the Fear Mansion is all about. You literally get an actual honest-to-goodness myth and or legend that is related by Simon Fear III to the kids. And this is the story of his great-uncle, the original Simon Fear, who built the Fear Mansion. This was my favorite part of the book. There's so much to talk about here. As we've mentioned ad nauseum in this review, Simon Fear was Simon Fear III's great-uncle. His grandfather was Simon Fear's brother. Basically, Simon's hanging out with the teenagers, and it comes out, that he's related to the Fear family, and they're like, the Fear family was legendary back in Shadyside. He's like, oh yeah, I know. Don't make it back there as much as I'd like nowadays. And they're all like, tell us a story, tell us a story. They're all begging for a story.
As I'm sure you know, Simon Fear, my great-uncle, was one of the first settlers of Shadyside. He was very rich. At least, that's the way the family has passed the story down. He was wealthy when he arrived in Shadyside, although no one knows where his money came from. For that matter, no one seems to know where Simon came from. No one knows what Simon Fear looked like. There are photos from that time of the rest of our family, but there are none of him. That's another one of the mysteries. Another mystery was why he built his fabulous mansion so far from town. For as I'm sure you know, there was no Fear Street in those days. In fact, there were no streets at all in that undeveloped part of town. Simon Fear built his enormous mansion back in the woods. It was so completely secluded, it could only be reached by following a dirt path through the trees. That's the path the workers made to get to the house as they were building it. It was not exactly a private man. Not at first, anyway. When he moved to Shadyside, Simon and his beautiful young wife, Angelica, were the toasts of the town. They were seen everywhere. Their mansion may have been secluded, but it is said that the lights there were always burning. Simon and Angelica threw lavish parties, and the house was always filled with guests. The Fears were extremely popular and well-liked. They did a lot for the town. Simon used his money to build the library, and he helped to build Shadyside's first hospital. Simon and Angelica had 2 beautiful daughters. Simon adored them both. Adored them too much, maybe. He didn't treat them like ordinary children. He didn't let them go to school. He brought in a tutor instead. He bought them anything and everything they wanted. And more. One year, so the story goes, he imported an entire circus from Europe, animals and all, and had them give a performance just for one of the girls' birthdays. It must have seemed to my great-uncle, living such a luxurious life in his secluded mansion, that the good times would go on forever. But they didn't. One day, Simon's 2 little girls went out to play in the woods. They didn't return. That night, and into the next morning, a frantic search ensued. The story goes that their bodies were found in the woods more than a week later. Their bodies, but not their bones. Their skeletons had been completely removed. After that, the lights in the large mansion in the woods never burned again. Everything changed. Angelica was never seen in town again. The story goes that she went completely mad, locked herself in her room, and never came out. At night, people all the way across the woods would hear strange and terrifying howls and cries coming, they guessed, from Angelica's room. And Simon? His life seemed to end as well. Simon lost all his money. Maybe he didn't lose it. Maybe he gave it away. All of the priceless paintings and sculptures in the house were sold, carted away. Simon, too, was never seen again in town. And then, mysteriously, the house burned down. Some say that Angelica, in her madness, set it aflame to punish Simon for bringing her to the place. Others say that Simon did it, bringing his house to an end along with his life. There was a written report by a man, their nearest neighbor, who happened to be in the woods. This person wrote that the house burst into flame and the flames roared for hours. But the house didn't burn until much later. Hellfire, he called it. After that report, few people would venture near the mansion. Angelica died in the fire. She is buried in the Fear Street Cemetery in an unmarked grave. And Simon? Never seen or heard from again.
What a great story. Yeah, I really like that. It's got a lot of elements that a traditional myth or legend would have. And I really like that it's clearly part of the actual honest-to-goodness Fear Street mythos. This is what the people of Shadyside tell their kids at night. This is the classic campfire story. I do have a couple minor nitpicks. I want to stress that these are minor because it is often the case with these ghost stories or myths or legends that there are inconsistencies that don't make sense in a completely rational way. But you're not supposed to approach stories like this from a rational standpoint. One interesting thing is that Simon is the one telling the story about his great uncle, but he actually literally states that no one knew where he came from. Well, he's telling a story about his relative. Everybody else in that generation apparently even had photographs taken of them. So how does his grandfather not know where his own brother came from? That doesn't make any sense. Also, interesting thing is the Fear Mansion is still around. It's right there, right in the middle of Fear Street. It's odd that they build Fear Street right past it, even though at the time that it burned down, there wasn't even a Fear Street. It was all woods. You know, who are all these people that wanted to build their mansions right next to this burned out haunted house? You know, it would make a lot more sense if the street had already been made, a bunch of rich people settled near each other and had mansions, and then one of them burned down. What we hear from this legend is that house is built in the middle of the woods, burns to the ground, and then later on, a street is built right past it, and a bunch of other people, most of them apparently well-to-do, built their houses right there next to this eyesore. Also put a cemetery there. Again, the old mansion is not demolished. It's just still there, just this gutted out old building from a fire that happened in the 1800s. That's another little nitpick I got.
I just assumed that when he first started building the house, it was in the woods. But, I mean, his 2 little girls were a certain age playing in the woods. I assume like maybe 8 and 10 or something like that.
Right.
So he's been in that area for, let's say, 10, 15 years. Yeah. I assume like some of the houses were built there during that time span. So when he first built the house, there was nothing. But then these things slowly popped up because he was having so many parties. It was a very lavish sort of lifestyle that he was leading in that specific area. And that's what brought the people there.
That makes sense. That would also make sense why there was an eyewitness. Now, going back into our mythos story, this guy has an unknown source of wealth, and here he is, sitting pretty on this strange mineral deposit that to this day, people are trying to seek out. Giant corporations, perhaps colluding with the US government. I mean, he could have been the first person to discover some of the properties of the mineral. And as far as that hellfire goes, he might have been doing
experimenting.
Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. When you're messing around with the unknown, sometimes accidents happen, and they didn't have all the safety protocols back then, and perhaps he didn't care because his daughters were dead and he valued his life a little bit less.
Well, maybe what happened to his daughters is a result of the minerals there.
Could be. I mean, we've all heard the stories of Fear Street and the Fear Street Woods.
Skeleton melting is not that far-fetched.
No, some really weird stuff going on out there.
Also, the location. Obviously, the rest of this book takes place near Cape Cod, so one could assume that these kids are living in the Northeast. However, if you Google the driving distance between Cape Cod and Northeast Ohio, it's about a 9-hour drive. It did seem like they were driving for a little bit to get to the ferry.
Right, but this book, I have to admit, is also one of the stronger arguments you can make towards Massachusetts' shady side.
Well, I think the main issue with that is that Center City seems to be the big city, and if they were in Massachusetts, then it'd be Boston.
And Boston, even if you want to come up with a fictional name for a city that describes Boston but is not the actual word Boston, Center City is not something that comes to mind. Boston doesn't strike me as a Center City type of town. Maybe Port Town or something to that effect. Not Center City. Boston doesn't have Center City written on it. I think we could talk about 90s things.
Sassy Magazine. It seems to be R.L. Stine's favorite 90s girls magazine.
Oh my god, you almost have to think he must have had a subscription to this thing because, holy crap, it comes up almost every book. In fact, I remember we had that Fear Street bingo. I can't believe Sassy Magazine wasn't on there because it should have been. This is definitely a Fear Street bingo. Landlines. Everything's a landline. There's even a switchboard. No cell phones. Walkman comes back, and this one's like the most classic 80s Walkman with like a little lanyard where you can basically hang it around your neck when you go for your jog or whatever. I think some of the original marketing material was aimed towards using it that way, but I think a lot of people just kind of, it had like a little clippy thing too, and they just kind of clipped it into the waistband or the belt or something. I don't know about the lanyard thing, but that's almost an 80s thing, to walk around with a radio or tape player hanging around you. That's like pretty old school. And of course nowadays musical devices are portable enough to fit into your pocket. So anyway, R.L. Stine really tries to set a creepy mood at the beginning of the book. So there's all the ghostly stuff going on, which we find out is all fake. Did you feel like it was real? Because I didn't.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, it didn't feel authentic to me.
The protoplasmic goo from Ghostbusters.
Oh yeah, that seemed so childish. And we've met ghosts before, like actual legit ghosts, and there was no protoplasmic goo. So if this universe is self-consistent, then
Jan should be living on Fear Street if she wants to see a ghost.
Right, and there's no protoplasm to be left behind. There's this weird black bird circling above them when they're having their beach picnic. R.L. Stine trying to be creepy, and it wasn't working for me. I was like, okay, so it's a black bird, who cares? They did start out having like a pretty good time. They were working during the day. In the evenings, they would go out and have a picnic on the sand dunes by the beach. I have to say, I didn't super see the whole split personalities thing coming. Actually, I didn't see it coming at all. But at the same time, I wasn't really surprised by it either. I definitely was not falling for any of the ghost stuff that was happening. It didn't seem authentic or genuine to me, and it turns out, yep, it was all fake. So good on R.L. Stine for presenting it as it was.
I thought Rose was more involved in whatever was happening.
I had that feeling too. It was just too weird that she disappeared, and we obviously didn't see that she was kidnapped.
Or her sudden diarrhea attack, or whatever the heck her issue was.
Gas.
It came so suddenly, and I was like, oh, she's never coming? So I was like, either Simon Fear is doing something, or Rose is totally in on it, and she brought these kids for a reason.
I definitely a little bit suspected her. I somehow never suspected Martin. Actually, honestly thought he was just trying to help them.
Have you seen the movie Get Out?
Yes, and I've heard you say the words Get Out quite a bit during this review, and I thought maybe it's just because everybody in this book keeps saying Get Out.
Martin keeps telling the kids to get out.
Yeah, this book really really reminded me of that movie. If you guys haven't seen Get Out,
it came out earlier this year.
And I highly recommend it, and so does Anna.
Well, I think the Get Out vibes made me not suspect him.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, I definitely suspected the whole Simon and Edward are probably the same guy thing because they're never in the room at the same time. And that's sort of like one of those big tropes where if you don't see them in the room at the same time, maybe they're the same person. Rose would have mentioned that, oh, Simon's there with his brother Edward, and she never did. So how many personalities would you give this book?
I would give this book... Wow, you know what's funny? Is because this book has 3 personalities. I don't know if I really enjoyed it enough to give it 3 personalities out of 5. I have to say, as long as we're talking about thoughts from the book and just the general writing style, my main problem with this is that coming into it, this being a super chiller, I expected there to be a lot more going on. It's a longer book, and this gives R.L. Stine the opportunity to flesh out the characters more. That's the thing, right? Obviously, his stories have always been pretty great. The whole plot ideas have been unique and interesting in their own ways. Just having a longer book gives you more time to flesh out the characters. What happened here is not that. The characters were not more fleshed out. You got the same exact character descriptions you get in a regular Fear Street book. You got about the same feeling for the characters you got in a regular Fear Street book, except then you get Craig, who is probably as poorly fleshed out as anybody gets in a Fear Street book. You know, you get the knife. The boys in the knife were worse, but this is just like one tiny step up above that in terms of how fleshed out the boys were in this book. Where's all the extra page count coming? It's just
the fake ghost stuff.
Fake ghost stuff and a couple of extra incidents. The amount of times they run to and from the house after they find out they're being hunted, you know, they don't need to run around the island that much. They could be a little bit more simpler. If their characters were developed more, would you care more about the kids being killed, potentially? You find out what they have to live for. You get more of their inner thought process of how it feels to be hunted. You didn't get as much of that. I feel like the super chiller format didn't meet my expectation. And maybe my expectations were unreasonable. What works really well over 160 pages, when stretched out to 250 or so, works about the same, except you have to slog through more pages, which starts taking away from it when it's this kind of book. So I'd have to give it a solid 2.5 personalities. Since we never saw Greta's personality very much in the book, I think that makes perfect sense.
I have to agree with you here, actually. Yeah, the characters were not as fleshed out. What I do think this book was able to do that other books aren't able to do is because it's longer, it doesn't feel as rushed. I do feel like it earned some of what it had in the end. So I do think this book did give you some more backstory that the other books aren't able to. For instance, I don't think some of his other books, the shorter ones, would be able to have the entire Fear Street mythology, the whole Simon Fear mansion stuff, the whole background of Simon Fear III. I do think it set that up well. I do agree that the characters themselves were as shallow as they've always been, where there's just nothing there. The fake ghost stuff, I do think that took up a lot, and because it just never felt authentic, it just did feel like padding to the book. And also the running to and from the house, that took up a lot. But at the same time, these kids are not the smartest, because if they're choosing to run to the house over and over again and turn on lights to feed someone as opposed to, I don't know, getting them out of a dangerous situation, it's fine then, I guess. They are not the smartest kids we've ever encountered. I would actually give it 2 out of 5 personalities. You only needed Edward and Simon. I think the whole Greta part was pointless anyways. So get rid of Greta completely. 2 out of 5.
That makes sense. Hey, so what are we reading next?
Another Fear Street super chiller.
Okay, before we get any further, I gotta know, because this might affect my prediction accuracy. Is this before or after the knife?
This is still pre-knife.
Oh man, alright. So we gotta think back like 3 books now to get where it is in the whole storyline.
Well, it's called Fear Street Super Chiller Silent Night.
Okay.
Happy holidays! You're dead.
Oh, shit.
It's one of those doors with a window in the front. Underneath the door window is a wreath.
Okay.
So it's Christmas time. Santa's very mad. He's gonna be big pimpin' driving up in his big limo, throwing gremlins at the house. So yeah, I think it's obviously during the holiday break. It's gonna be one of the holidays. I think we haven't had a Christmas book yet. So this is gonna be our first Christmas book.
Yeah, you might be right. You might be onto something.
That's interesting. Yeah, she looks terrified staring out the window. And it's obvious because someone is trying to murder her. She's being stalked. I bet she lives on Fear Street. They're always stalked and murdered on Fear Street.
That's true.
So she's a girl that's being stalked. This guy wants to kill her. It's a male murderer. It's you know what? It's a female. It's going to be a female trying to kill her for some reason. I think maybe she's already killed another female. So female murderer, female victim, and I'm going to say with a knife.
We have... Are you sure it's a door? Oh yeah, I guess it is a door. She's looking out her door and she's super scared because, oh my god, maybe the killer actually dresses up like Santa. That would be really cool. So that's it. We're locking and loading this. Basically, there's going to be a stalker that's following this girl, and it's going to be... You said it was going to be female, right? Okay, so I'm going to have to change mine to male, and it's going to be a female victim, and I'm going to go with strangulation.
Are you sure the stalker's not following her from Shadyside to her vacation home?
No. You see, they're actually going to be on Fear Street during Christmas. The thing that happens is that it's a silent night, and once she's finally dead, her screams will be silenced. Alright, so that's that. That's my prediction, and it's locked and loaded. Alright, guys, we're going to see you next time.
Thanks for listening.
Peace!
Thanks for listening to another thrilling episode of RetRead Podcast.
If you like what you hear, give us a shout out.
If not, let us know why in the comments.
Don't forget to rate, review, comment, share, like, and subscribe.
You can follow us at RetRead Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Or send suggestions or fan mail to red.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Until next time.
Peace!